Like, can you tell I'm a filmmaker?
Can I? You're the second filmmaker I've talked to today, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, filmmakers are coming up in the rankings of people who watch my video, apparently, besides IT professionals and I don't know the other people. So how's your film going?
Good. Lots of planning, because we're gonna be out in the Bay Area at the end of January, or end of April. January. What am I talking about? The end of April. We're driving up there, and then I'll be kind of traveling all of May. So I'm trying to get everything that I can done that I need to do here, and make sure that I get all the other stuff done. It's a lot of scheduling issues, and everybody's like availability, and just traveling is the whole thing of like, where are people going to stay?
Yep.
And all of that stuff. So
yep. I can imagine. I actually thought of the tipless restaurant idea. I was in Australia for a couple of weeks, and they don't tip in Australia. So I actually met some Australians coming to America, and they were all wondering about this tipping business. And so I gave them a little instruction on tipping. So
yeah, I always just told them, double the tax. Double the tax, because it's generally around 9%. You're giving them 18%. So like,
unless the service is crappy, I'd give them nothing.
I wouldn't go that far, but
well, it's the accountability thing. Because I was in Australia, and we'd go to a restaurant and be like, what if they give me crappy service? I can't cut the bill, or then I'm going to call the cops. At least in America, you got a little bit of leverage on the wait staff. So
just you're power hungry.
That's right. I'm power hungry. I want leverage over the wait staff. So what do you want to talk about today?
Okay. So I want to talk about a couple things, but I want to start with Jordan Peterson.
Okay.
Because this might be an unpopular opinion for.
Oh, good.
Crowd.
There's no unpopular opinion about Jordan Peterson. Everybody's got one.
Well, I can't ever decide whether I like Jordan Peterson or I don't. And I can't totally put my finger on why. I have some like ideas about it, but they're not like fully formed, and I just keep going back and forth. So I kind of want to ask you, and kind of, I've been listening to your podcast, so I'm getting a little bit more of an idea, but like, why are you so drawn to Jordan Peterson? Like, what about that movement fascinates you, and like that you've dedicated so much time to it?
That's a good question. Number one, I saw, as a pastor, I saw many people. There's been a big, let's put it in Facebook terms or Twitter terms. There's been a big unfollowing of the church over the last few decades. Mm-hmm. Church attendance reached its height during the Cold War in the United States. And many people who have left the church usually fell into three categories. Number one, they kind of maintained some kind of Christian profession, but left the church. Number two, they embraced sort of an atheism. And number three, they embraced sort of a pantheism. And I've watched that go. And what I began to notice watching the movement around Jordan Peterson was that atheists began to express interest in Christianity, serious interest in the Bible and Christianity again. That was noteworthy. That I hadn't seen before. So that's one point. Another point was there's been a disconnect in churches between, well, there's kind of science and religion. There's that tension. One way that gets expressed is someone who, let's take your conservative fundamentalist who believes the King James Version of the Bible. They read Genesis 1, and then I'd always play games with people. So then I'd quiz them. Well, what did you read? Well, that's how God made the world. Well, describe that world for me. And they wouldn't describe a flat earth with a dome, a firmament, with the sun, moon, and stars beneath the firmament. And this is what is described pretty clearly in Genesis 1, especially if you read a fairly literalistic version, like the King James Bible, none of them are describing that. So I ask questions like, when they went to the moon, or where are the waters above? And people would say clouds. I said, yeah, but the clouds are below, the moon is below the waters above. So, and I'd ask people questions like that. You get into these worldview questions. And the church has kind of had a disconnect between the worldview of the Bible and our contemporary cosmology. And I don't think those are irresolvable questions, but I noticed that I'm a pastor. I noticed that at a popular level, people weren't dealing with them. And I noticed that, in a sense, what Jordan Peterson was doing with his strange concordism that he expressed in the biblical series was actually trying to reintegrate in his kind of own Jungian way the world of the Bible and the world that people are living in. And now there are these atheists and pantheists who are suddenly getting excited about Jordan Peterson's conceptualization of it. I thought, that's interesting. So I got interested in it. And, there's the culture war stuff. I found that to be helpful in some ways too. But that wasn't my primary interest in it at all, which is unlike a lot of other people. So there were a lot of these pieces that I found very interesting about him. And then I started doing videos and people started wanting to talk to me. And then it's like, well, as a pastor, I should talk to people. So that's how I got doing this.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, because I've noticed that a little bit too, and not with everybody, because some of my atheist friends think Jordan Peterson's like a hack. They hate him.
Yep.
But I had one friend who, he's not like militant atheist, but he was sort of like apathetic atheist.
Yep.
And I had given him a C.S. Lewis book and a Tim Keller book.
Uh-huh.
And he couldn't even get past the first page of the Tim Keller book. He was so upset and angry. And I'm like, you are very triggered. And I don't know why, because Tim Keller's pretty mild dude. And then he liked C.S. Lewis better, but I don't think he ever read it. He's like, that seems a little bit better. But then he told me he loved Jordan Peterson. He loved his book or whatever. And that's why I read it. And I started reading. I'm like, there is so much Bible in here. How in the world is this guy reading this book when he can't even like fathom reading Tim Keller? It just was like weird to me. And like, I don't know. I think I say this all the time. Like, I feel like Jordan Peterson, I can see his endpoints and agree with a lot of the things he says, but then I'll sit and listen to him and try to see how he got there, and it feels like he's just like way like just talking and just saying random stuff. I'm like, I don't know how you got here. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. It's so silly. Like the Sam Harris podcast is just the best example. The first one, I didn't.
Oh, the first one, yeah.
But I was just sitting there like wanting to pull my hair out, being like, you were not making any sense. And it's not that I think Sam Harris is Mr. Consistent all of the time, but I'm like, he's right. Just listen to him. Like, it drove me crazy.
Well, and your experience, again, I mean, just like you said, I know plenty of atheists who they will not listen to Jordan Peterson. They have zero interest in them. But it's the ones that, just like you described. So before, in about 2006 to about 2011, I basically did a similar thing with Tim Keller. And in terms of, I found someone who was really interesting, and part of, so one thing you can do if you're going to be a lifelong learner is you can just always graze at whatever feels salient to you at the moment. That's not a bad way to go. But another thing to do sometimes is to take a person and do a deep dive. And so I did a real deep dive into Tim Keller, partly just as a pastor, because he's a very successful pastor. I was very interested in, I had a fair amount of alignment in terms of belief. We're both Reformed. And so I wanted to learn his stuff. I wanted to get better. And I see Jordan Peterson being, an outstanding evangelist, which is a very strange thing for a guy who lives as if, who doesn't go to church. Say, okay, what can I learn from this guy? So what is that? I don't know. And I've been looking at it for a year, and a lot of it is, I just actually talked to a friend of mine Sunday when I got back to church. He's an elder at church, and he went to a meetup and really enjoyed the meetup because I was gone. And then he started listening to some Tim Keller videos, and he's like, the guy rambles. You know what? Why is everybody so interested in it? Will he get to the point? And it's like, you're right. You're right. That's the way he is, and some people love it. Why? I don't know. It's true.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just weird because, like, he does have this weird following. Like, and I was listening to Dak Shepard's podcast when Sam Harris was on it, and he's
I haven't listened to the one with Sam Harris. I'm going to want to listen to that because his one with Brett Weinstein was very interesting.
I haven't listened to that one, but I love Brett Weinstein. I need to listen to that.
Yeah, listen to that one. That's a fascinating podcast.
Yeah, well, the first time I heard Brett Weinstein was on another podcast, the Julian Smith's podcast. Have you ever heard that?
No.
The Julian Smith was like a YouTuber way back in the day, and he did a bunch of comedy videos. And then recently he's kind of relaunched, but as like a podcaster, and has talked with like a bunch of different people. And I haven't listened to it a long time. I think it's sort of transformed into something different than it was before. But he talked with Brett Weinstein, and that's sort of where I started kind of being interested in him. So I'll have to check that out. But yeah, Sam Harris was on it, and he was talking about his talks between Jordan Peterson and himself, and how sometimes Jordan Peterson can just say something in a certain tone and everybody just like applauds. Like, it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
Like this sort of cultish following.
Yeah.
And like, you could probably make the same charge for a Sam Harris type, but
yeah.
I do find that so interesting where I'm talking to like young guys who are really into Jordan Peterson, like diehard fans of like 12 Rules and stuff, and just like, just eat up everything he says. And then it's like, but he, like, sometimes he makes sense. And then sometimes he's just like I watched this, it was like a talk. It was some other woman that I don't remember, Jordan Peterson and William Lane Craig. And I was just dying laughing, just watching William Lane Craig just sit and watch him, like, because he's so like logic and, you know, a little bit robotic, and just trying to be like, what are you talking about? In like that William Lane Craig, like, stoic way.
Yeah.
I don't know, it's weird. And I like Jordan Peterson in the way that he can engage with people and like is willing to kind of, I think he engages people who are more curious and not someone who already has the answers, or like someone who just wants to explore ideas. Jordan Peterson's great at that because he'll just throw out thought experiments. And a lot of times he says stuff that I don't think he actually totally 100% believes, but just saying, hey, let's take this to its logical conclusion. Like the whole makeup stuff. Like, what is makeup for? Like, I think that's more of a thought experiment than his actual belief. And I think a lot of time we actually don't even know what Jordan Peterson really does believe because he's so intentional about everything that he says. Like, I think sometimes he doesn't want to say what he actually thinks because he doesn't want that to be on the record.
And see, you're not alone in thinking that. And that's really interesting to me.
He's always kind of waiting in uncertainty. It could be. It could be. Like, he has a thought on that. He has to have his own perspective on that. I don't think that he's gone through life that much just waiting in that. But I don't think he wants to be put on the record with some stuff. He won't take that step to ground that.
I see. I don't get that sense from him. But you're not alone in feeling that about him. I've heard a number of other people say very much the same thing. So that interests me.
Well, I could be wrong, but that's something I've started. Yeah, I've started.
But it's data
too, because it's like, I mean, I think there's a lot of things that he says that I can be like, okay, I really do think you believe that. But then sometimes he'll leave things open.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm not convinced that he's really that, like, I don't know. Like, he's a thinker. Like, I'm sure he has an idea of like where he lies on that spectrum more. Like, we all kind of lean one way or the other. But I don't think he wants to say it.
It could be. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people think that's true about his relationship to Christianity or the resurrection. I mean, Sam Harris was really driving in on him in one of the Sam Vancouver talks about the resurrection.
Mhm.
And I when I listen to Peterson, to me, he appears to be a pretty much an open book. Now, I think it's also the case that he's clearly gotten more measured in his speech since he's gotten way more popular. If you watch old videos of him, it's on Ontario Public Television, or I mean, to a certain degree, when you don't have high status, you don't have a lot to lose. Say whatever the heck you want. Now, everything he says gets analyzed and criticized, and so that's just going to make you a little naturally guarded.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting. It is. Peterson's just a fascinating guy, and it's not just him. It's the whole thing around him. I mean, he's a very charismatic, very interesting guy. I mean, if he wasn't charismatic, he very often won teaching awards because students loved him, and he kind of a cult leader in some ways. That's who he is. But what's even more interesting to me is again it's everything around him. And that's what you're discussing. And so then your observations are interesting to me because again it's more data. One of the things that I said at the conference I did in Australia was often, and this is a generalization, but by and large, women read the book and men watch the videos. That's a generalization. And the Peterson, the author, and Peterson, the talker, they're different, and people have different responses to them.
They are different because I've done both. I read the book and I started with his videos, and then.
How many did you get through, and which ones did you start with?
I don't remember. I watched a lot of stuff, Paul.
Okay.
I probably haven't watched a crazy amount. I've watched more of his stuff with, like his interviews, like all the controversial stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I've watched some of his videos, and like heard some of his speeches, but I don't know which ones. I can't remember.
See, and in a sense, the Peterson canon is really the biblical series, Maps of Meaning, Personalities, and the older stuff. Once you got past Kathy Newman, everything got a little different.
Yeah.
The biblical series still go past there, but that's a different Peterson. And the hardcore folks, and again, why this happens, I don't know, but people tell me this story all the time. They saw Jordan Peterson, they did the biblical series, they did Maps of Meaning, they did Personality, and some of people have watched them 4 or 5 times. And what's with that? That's so interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird. I think I probably need to just watch more of like OG Peterson or something, because I feel like a lot of what I've seen is like the 12 rules stuff, and I've seen a little bit of biblical stuff and the Maps of Meaning stuff, but I mean, just sort of as far as what people in my circles are talking about, it's usually that stuff, which is, I don't know, that stuff's sort of weird to me because it is this weird culty sort of thing where you've got all of these guys who love this like lifestyle and like are just diehard fans of Jordan Peterson. And like some of the advice is good, but again, I was talking to Christian about this actually the other day. Like when he doesn't take that extra step and ground that in anything, I feel like a lot of that is just going to leave people.
Well, give me an example.
Oh man, trying to.
What does he say that when you hear it, you say, nope, wrong, can't go there?
it's not like, well, that's the thing. It's not his final conclusions. Like most of his final conclusions, I can go, yeah, I can agree with that. And not so much with his book. I think usually when he's talking off the cuff and like, you know, delving into more philosophy, that's where I have the issue. When he starts delving into philosophy, it's like, okay, that's not your specialty. And
Really? So can you give me an example?
Well, I mean, the Sam Harris one was like the biggest one, where I was just listening to that and being like, okay, you can tell that Sam Harris got his undergrad in philosophy because he's actually like making way more sense than Jordan Peterson, who seemed like a little bit all over the place. And then, yeah, there was that other talk between him and William Lane Craig. I can't remember what the talk was or even what it was about, because honestly, I was just sitting there going like, are you saying anything? Are you just talking in circles? Like,
well, see, and listening to those two examples, there's definitely a worldview issue at work here, because Sam Harris represents a particular philosophical school. So does William Lane Craig. So William Lane Craig and Sam Harris, in many ways, have a lot in common in terms of their approach to the world.
Yeah.
Peterson is conversant in that, but Peterson actually isn't so much a part of that worldview. And what Peterson is proposing is much more existentialist, and I would argue in some ways more postmodern than William Lane Craig and Sam Harris.
Right, but like I feel like Jordan Peterson just rails against postmodern.
Yeah, I know.
And then talks like a postmodernist. I'm like, oh my gosh, it drives me crazy.
But he's got a lot of postmodernity. He's integrated a fair amount of postmodernity in his thought. He understands it, and I think he's integrated it. But also see, here's the thing about Peterson. He's got a lot of pre-modern, modern, and postmodern. And one of the things, so I talked to someone who knows him personally, and one of the interesting critiques that this person gave to me, unsolicited, this person just wanted to talk to me about him, that Peterson mirrors his audience, when he's talking. And the shifting of the Petersons, some people really don't like it. They find it inauthentic. They find it dishonest even. Mm-hmm. I personally don't have that much trouble with it, because actually as a pastor, I also do a fair amount of that because I talk to a wide variety of people. And Peterson, of course, is a clinical psychologist. So in terms of your psychological practice, as a professional, you try to meet people where they're at. And part of what happens in conversation is you always do a certain amount of mirroring and active listening so that the person has a fair amount of confidence that you're on the same page. But I'm not surprised by anything that you've told me, and a number of other people have told me very much what you've told me. And
yeah, I don't think I'm alone in that. And I have this conversation with a lot of people, and yeah, I just feel like I don't have any issue with him necessarily. I guess I just think that he's a little overhyped, and maybe it's just the controversial nature about what you bring with Jordan Peterson.
Oh yeah. So now I had a conversation with Christian, and that's how you and I got connected.
Right.
How do you feel about how Christian thinks about him?
I'm not even totally sure exactly how he thinks about him.
Okay.
Because I don't know, because he doesn't, from what I've gathered, it's not like he's a hardcore Jordan Peterson fan necessarily. I think he's learned a lot from your podcast about Jordan Peterson and started learning about him. But because I think, I'm trying to remember exactly how it all came up, but we were talking and he mentioned Jordan Peterson, and I was like, he's like, do you know Jordan Peterson? I'm like, yeah, I know Jordan Peterson. Why, what is it about Jordan Peterson that's interesting to you? And I don't remember exactly what his answer was, but yeah, I don't know, like, it's hard to keep track of exactly what people believe, because I've talked to a couple people about Jordan Peterson. Like, I have a friend who I work with, and she just doesn't like Jordan Peterson in this really humorous way, where she's just thinks it's so funny that like all of these people are doing that. And she'll always send me all these weird like Jordan Peterson culty memes, and like just all these articles just like about how weird it all is. And so I'm always interested in hearing her, because she's the same way with me, but she's more aggressive about it, that she just thinks he's overrated. And I'm just like, yeah, I think so. But then I'm just like, always sort of like, but I kind of can appreciate that he's helping people,
Yeah.
and like getting people to think in this different way. But yeah, then it's just, I don't know. I sort of get bored with him. Like the more, like, that's why I don't think I just keep listening to him.
Yeah.
I sort of get bored with him. Like,
Yeah.
and like, I don't know. I think maybe I'm just drawn to more of those, not quite as like out there and charismatic people. Because when you're always talking about Jonathan Haidt, I'm like, I love him. I think he's great. He's so interesting. I am so interested in him. But like, yeah, you're always like, he's the adult in the room. And I'm like, great.
That's Jonathan Haidt. He's a very typical academic in that he's measured, he's brilliant.
Yeah.
He can Jordan Peterson can make strong linear arguments. I'm not saying Jordan Peterson can't do that, but his style is much more haphazard. But Jonathan Haidt, very disciplined. You know, Jonathan Haidt isn't walking around the stage, you know, weeping and, you know, ranting, and
Yeah.
measured, disciplined, passionate, but measured, passionate. That's Jonathan Haidt. He's the adult in the room.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I have a weird, what I'm drawn to is weird. It's either like sort of like the William Lane Craig, super logical, super measured, very calm, like, or like super conversational, where it's like exploring people and that sort of thing.
Can you give an example of who you're talking about there?
Well, I mean, like Tim Mackey. Have you seen him? He does the Bible Project.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So he has the Bible Project podcast, but he also has his like My Strange Bible. And I find that super interesting, because him and his partner John just sit and they talk through these topics and these videos, and just sit and have conversations about that. And to me, that's totally changed my perspective on the way Christianity, like what Christianity is, and like just going back. And he's like all about like going back to like the text and understanding it through that cultural lens.
Yeah. Those guys are great. I love those guys. The work they do, they're just off the chart. I have nothing but admiration and deep appreciation for them. But part of it for me is I find them less interesting, partly because I agree with them so often that less interesting. You know, one of the things, so again, at this conference that I did in Australia, you know, I'm just always fascinated by data. There was, you know, most of my meetups are men. Most of the people who seek me out for conversation are men. Mm-hmm. So there are a fair number of women at this conference, and some of the women very sharp, very articulate, rather outspoken, sometimes on two sides of the conversation. It was funny. One person railing against the patriarchy, another one with a full-throated defense of the patriarchy. That was a moment I won't forget. That was fascinating. But
that's Australia for you.
What's that?
That's Australia for you. That's Melbourne.
It was, you know, and so I've been very interested in women's responses to Peterson, and I have had some on my channel, but many, again, it's men are just responding to this dude differently, and there's obviously something psychological to it. He's filling a need for many men. So I think it's very interesting, your reaction to it, and the fact that men have for the most part, just gone down the rabbit hole. And you know, again, I'll talk to them and they'll say, I saw him on Joe Rogan. It's like, bang. And then I watched everything and I'm so frustrated. He's not doing the biblical series. And I mean, that's what's happening. But not a lot of women have told me that. Women have more told me, I read 12 Rules for Life. I was a little annoyed at the chaos feminine thing. And one woman said at the conference, I almost didn't get past that page. But it's just been interesting. And so, you know, your response to me about these things, this is very interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, because I was trying to think about, so when I first heard about Jordan Peterson, it was on one of those like clips of like a Rubin report. So he's on the Rubin report. It was one of those like clickbait clips or whatever, you know, it's like, ugh. Like he owns Sam Harris on Christianity or something stupid title like that. But I just clicked it. I'm like, who's this guy? What is he talking about, Sam Harris? And I remember being super bored and being like, you're not making sense. And just moving on.
Now, do you watch a lot of YouTube?
Yeah, probably too much.
Okay, well, what kinds of things do you like?
I listen to it changes so often. I listen to a lot of podcasts. So
okay.
I went through a phase with Rubin Report, and now I'm sort of, I still listen to it, but only when it's someone that I know. I had a Ben Shapiro thing for a while, and I'll still, that dude makes me laugh. Like, he's so funny, but like, he's just ridiculous, and like, just the way he expresses himself, it makes me laugh. And then I'll listen to like clips of things and debates. I watched a bunch of debates on YouTube. Like the William Lane Craig, Sam Harris, the John Lennox, and all that crap. And then, yeah, and so now I'm more into, I haven't been watching YouTube as much as podcasts. So the Dax Shepard podcast I listen to all of the time. I find that really interesting because he's super conversational. And like, I'm in entertainment, so he talks to a lot of people in entertainment and just hearing their stories. And he really does delve into like perspectives and stuff. Like, I don't know how much you've listened to that podcast.
I've only listened to the Brett Weinstein one, but it was an excellent podcast.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. So there are these 3-hour just conversations where they sit and they talk to people about their childhoods and how they got in the industry and, you know, sort of how to be, like, they're kind of just talking about how successful people are successful and how they used what their experiences and their beliefs to help them get there. Like, he talked with Erica Christensen about like Scientology on one of them, which was sort of interesting. She made it sound somewhat normal, but like, I don't know enough. That's the thing. I don't know much about Scientology. I know it's a little crazy. That's all I know. But like, she's talking about it because she's a Scientologist, and it makes it sound sort of normal. You could just listen to that and be like, oh, Scientology. Like, that's... She
didn't write SOS on her eyelids, did she? You know, and just...
No. I don't think so.
Get me out of here.
He's like a fairly rational person, which is so funny. But she grew up in the Church of Scientology.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. But you hear all of these different perspectives, and you learn a lot about different people. And I like listening to the ones where either I don't know them at all, or I kind of know them, but don't really know enough about them, because you just learn so much about people. It's just fascinating to me to like understand how people function, what they actually believe. And Dax Shepard's really good at getting people to say, you know, be really raw and say really real things. And like, it's kind of cool. I don't know about the Brett Weinstein one, but the Sam Harris one, when I listened to that one, it was not quite as much of his normal style. It was much more like intellectual thinking, you know, and like the argument and stuff. And then the Jonathan Haidt one, because he did one with Jonathan Haidt too.
Oh, did he? Oh,
yeah. Okay. That's where I first heard Jonathan Haidt, and it was just like, oh, this dude is so cool. Like,
yeah.
But
Haidt's the real deal. He's really helpful.
He's so awesome. I need to listen to more of him. But yeah. So I mean, I went through a phase. I sort of told this last time. I went through a phase where I was watching everything that I could get my hands on, just like, and reading
everything about what? Because there's a lot of things out there.
Yeah. But like, no, mostly like religion and like atheism and that sort of stuff, and then a little bit about politics too. But like I was just like really intensely like wanting to learn about that stuff. So it was mostly like atheism. So
what was your relationship with the church when you were listening to that stuff?
It was mixed. So there was a time where I was still like a Christian, but going through my doubts, trying to figure it out, and not like I was going to a church but not really connected. And then second half of it, realizing like, okay, I need to be connected to a church. So I started going to a different church that was smaller and really connected.
And then
now, I mean, I'm still a little bit into it, not as hardcore as I was before, but now I'm connected with the church.
Okay. I was curious about, I mean, because part of the question here that we're asking about Peterson is motivation. There's something that Peterson is doing that is motivating a deep interest in him. And I think some of that gets into the meaning crisis that Vervaeke, named in terms of his stuff. And there is a certain, one of the things that I noticed was that so then I pay attention, okay, who's listening to me? What kinds of letters am I getting? So on and so forth. And there's always sort of a bell curve. Well, a lot on the bell curve were men suffering with, I'd say, nihilistic depression. And that's a big element, at least of people who have contacted me. And Peterson has been very helpful for many of them because meaning and leaving depression were two very critical things. Meaning, and Peterson is right on this, meaning is far more important for us than happiness or even suffering. People will willingly suffer for something that's sufficiently meaningful. And I think especially men. Women, women certainly have those same things going on too. But as a man, I know it's true for men that there's something within us, there's this heroic strain that gets triggered and motivated when there's a great task that needs to happen, and we marshal our energies and we move towards it, and that's powerful. And Peterson triggers that. And Peterson gives men a vision for that and challenges them in a special way that says to them, I can get off the couch, I can do something other than play computer games, which often are triggering the same things internally. And in real life, I can do something meaningful, which in our frame of reference might mean, daring to get a career or build a long-term committed relationship or, something, pursue a religious discipline. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, but I think my issue is like, if we're talking about nihilism, like I just don't, like I can see people going to like religion and finding that meaning and then feeling that fulfillment. But I think for people who are like still in that agnostic atheist category, who are taking this meaning that Peterson's giving them, it's not grounded in anything. So it's like, yeah, you can have that meaning, but it's sort of this delusion, right? Like if there's no God, it's this delusion that you have this meaning, this purpose, and like, fine, it makes you feel good, whatever. But what does that even mean?
Well, that's why Peterson is so tantalizing, because he's not coming right out there and saying it like, let's say, Mark Driscoll, who, and even the words you've chosen to describe your reluctance about Peterson in terms of grounded, that's a very modernistic approach. Sam Harris will use that. William Lane Craig will use that. That's this foundationalist approach, rational foundationalism, and there's a lot that's been the cultural, philosophical, and even theological milieu. And so when you talk to certain evangelicals, it's grounded in Scripture. That's the language. Now, here's the thing: you won't find grounded in Scripture. The word's not there. It's not used in that way. That's a cultural framework. And, we have to have a culture. That's the operating system of the culture. Now, what Peterson triggers in people is the imagination of the adventure and the imagination of the great king and almost a chivalry. And people are willing to go for it without all the data. I mean, people don't sit there and say, I'm not going to do anything until I have all my philosophical ducks in a row. We like to imagine we work that way. We really don't. Every time there's a war, 9/11, how many people signed up for the military? What percentage of them actually went overseas to fight? How many of them sat in offices managing the stuff of the army? But that's what men do. And so and I think that's part of the reason why Jordan Peterson, who doesn't go to church, triggers a whole generation of men to look for the hero and to be the hero and to look for the great hero to follow. So
yeah,
I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I don't know. And I guess maybe I'm just coming from my perspective where it's like growing up in the church and like having these ideas of what I believed and then, getting to a place where I believed them, not completely emotionally, but from a more emotional place. I needed to be able to go back and say, okay, I need to start over and create that foundation, or I'm just going to end up in the same place all over again. Like, just to wait in that uncertainty so much is just going to drive me crazy. Yeah. And like a lot of people like have to like count the cost of Christianity. I had to count the cost of atheism and be like, listen, if I become an atheist, I lose everything that like is the most important to me. But like, if it's true, am I willing to say that? And I had to go, okay, yep, and then start that journey and say, whatever's true. Because like, unless, I think, was it Sean McDowell says that all the time, like if you're believing what's true, you have nothing to be scared of. And like, I mean, maybe it doesn't say it exactly in Scripture, but like building your house on the rock, right? Like when you build that on that foundation of truth,
yeah.
Storm's gonna come, you're not gonna be shaken. But like the minute that we don't do that, it's like, okay, you have all this meaning, and I think you're getting benefits from doing things that are good for you. But like, if it's not built on something other than just saying, I need meaning to make me feel good, I just don't see that being helpful in the long term.
So, but now when you're saying meaning in that phrase, you're using meaning as a feeling, as an experience, which is legitimate. Part of what Peterson is saying, again, this is part of the reason he's so tantalizing, is he says this feeling of meaning is actually in some sense an internal compass. And it's more reliable than you might imagine. And if you keep following that, if you do what is meaningful and not what is expedient, you will actually begin to align with reality. And now, again, you're exactly right. Peterson is not tagging this necessarily to what has been the frame of reference for most evangelicals. This is grounded in Scripture. But he is framing this in a way that says, and he says, if the reality that we have experienced in Western civilization is true enough to produce a society that works better than other societies. Therefore, it's a good bet that this framework is in fact truer than the other frameworks. Because remember, he's a pragmatist. So pragmatists don't demand certainty in the ways that, say, foundationalists demand certainty. And so Peterson would say, it's good enough to go with because that's the best you got. Again, that's American pragmatism. So I completely understand the deficiencies you see in Peterson's framework from your point of view. But I also understand why for a good many men, they say, I I am suspicious of this certainty to the degree that I'm not going to pursue it. Now, when I listen to you just describe your journey, it's very meaningful what you did. You came to a conclusion that said, hey, if I'm going to live, I need to know this is solid. I want to be built on a rock. I'm going to dig down and I'm going to find what's true.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right. We all inhabit a culture. Peterson's of a little different culture than you, so I'm not at all surprised he doesn't grip you. But there's a lot of people that are in a different culture. So,
yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like, that's the thing. I'm not like, you're an idiot if you like Peterson, like some people, but
no, you haven't said anything like that. But you know, so part of it is, you know, so if you look at Western thought, boy, I've done hours of video on these subjects. Why, you know, existentialists. So, okay, let's use Esther O'Reilly, who's the blogger out there. You know, she's always talking to me on Twitter. Let's talk about Esther. Esther is she's gonna listen to this, and she's gonna have words for me about this. Esther is a classic modernist foundationalist, rationalist. That's how Esther works. So when Julian, another guy on my channel, and some other people that have talked to me love Kierkegaard, well, the existentialists are just more comfortable with the skepticism. And their internal metrics work a different way. Peterson's far more existentialist than foundationalist. The thing about Peterson is, though, when it comes to his science, he practices a certain kind of foundationalism, which is what Sam Harris can respect. And this is why Peterson is such a broad and tantalizing figure, because he can talk foundationalism, he can talk existentialism, he can talk postmodernism, he can even talk kind of ancient world philosophies. So, but I'm not at all surprised, having heard more of you, why you don't care for him. And there's many people like you. So, which is cool.
yeah, I mean, like, because I think I agree with you that he can talk all of these things. He can like hold a conversation and create something that people find interesting. But sometimes I feel like he's trying to do too much. Like, there's one thing to just talk about stuff, and then another thing to like make sense about, like make sense and be really clear about what you're talking about. But I think Jordan Peterson is just, he has the way that he talks is like intriguing, even if he's not really saying much. Like, there's this parody video that my friend sent to me about like him talking about Burger King. And sometimes I seriously feel like when I listen to him talk, I'm like, that's it. Like, that's absolutely Jordan Peterson 100%, where he's saying all of these words and it sounds really eloquent. But then when you get back to it, you're like, what did you just say? Like, this is
See, I don't have that experience with him. And again, I think this is, so these different philosophical cultures also have their different language cultures.
Yeah.
And so, you know, Esther O'Reilly is just dying for Peterson to line up in a certain way. I'm a little bit more comfortable with the skepticism. And so, yeah, but I totally get what you're saying here.
Well, I think I'm mixed, because there's a part of me that likes the skepticism and likes that. And then there's another, I don't know. I just think.
But listening to your story, I mean, you told me your story. You got to a point where you said, hey, either this is true or it isn't. And this is how you deal with truth. And when you talked about his first conversation with Sam Harris, that entire conversation was a cultural mismatch. Sam Harris kept trying to talk foundational, rational truth, and Peterson's just going on out here. And so if you're in Sam Harris's culture, along with William Lane Craig, those aren't religious divisions, you're going to look at Peterson and say, psh. And so when everyone was excited about Peterson talking to William Lane Craig, and I thought, it's not going to be nice. Nobody's going to be satisfied with that conversation.
No, it didn't go well.
No, and then you have the woman out there who was doing her own thing, and it's like, well, this is a mess. It was a mess, but And so then the question is, so then people are always like, I want Peterson to talk to such and such. Well, so Peterson's going to talk to Zizek. And I've seen a few things with him, and I think, boy, that thing's just going to be Zizek going like this and Peterson going like this. And I mean, somebody even did a video about that a long time ago, because are they even going to be able to find each other out there? So, and that opens the whole conversation. What makes for a really good conversation? It's usually when there's enough similarity that people can meet, but there's enough difference so that it can be interesting. Well, now we're talking order chaos stuff. So
yeah, no, I think that's the perfect way to describe like the best conversations. Because I think for me, the funnest conversations are those people who like, we can agree on like operating models and how we're going about this, but like we have different views and how that comes down, and just going and digging through it. And I don't know, I think maybe sometimes when I'm watching Peterson, I'm approaching it in the wrong mindset. Like when I'm listening to something that's more conversational, I go into that just being like, oh, okay, let's explore this. Let's explore people. Let's understand why they believe in what they're doing. But sometimes when you're going into stuff like debates, I go into that model of like, okay, these two people are, just arguing. Let's sift through all of this. Like,
and this is part of why when I describe what's in my head, I think of a consciousness congress, because actually what you've just showed me is that on one hand, you've got a culture and a system of some rationalist foundationalism. That's something that you're comfortable, but you're also very interested in people. So you're someone who has a conversational style, who's going to, Dax Shepard, who's going to dig in there and get people to say what they wouldn't necessarily say. He did that with Sam Harris, again, or with Brett Weinstein. That was a fascinating conversation. So those are all different aspects of you. But so part of you watches Jordan Peterson, but other people who have different mixes, they'll do the deep dive on him and they'll bite hard. Whereas you, no, that's just not how you're going to line up. So
well, I think it's interesting with like the style and the way you go about it. You've found a way to sort of balance between the two of those, where you're like talking about all of this information and stuff, but like do it in this way that kind of explores it, but in a way that I can understand it more than Jordan Peterson, or maybe I'm just not trying hard enough to understand.
No, don't. Here's the thing about Peterson. He has been. We are all limited to a degree by our experience, our temperaments, all of these things. Peterson has been a clinical psychologist. He's been a teacher. He's been a researcher. I've been a pastor. And so I have a far better understanding of the nuances of the American church than he does. When he goes to Liberty University, part of him has no idea who he's talking to.
Yeah.
Well, why should he? He's not conversant in that culture. When I go to Austria, when I went to the Dominican Republic and worked with Haitians, I didn't know anything of what it's like to be a poor Haitian cane cutter. So I basically shut up because I had a ton I had to learn. So, I can talk a language that I can talk to you in a way that he can't, because I know more of your background than he can. And so he just did a conversation with David. David, was it Hannah? I can't remember his name right now. But the VP of spiritual life at Liberty, and Peterson's doing some investigating with him and asking him a little bit about his experience. And if you're around evangelicals enough, it's just boring, because you know exactly what the guy's going to say, and the experiences behind it. So
yeah, well, I think that's the thing. Like when you get to a certain point with some of these like apologists, like William Lane Craig, like I don't even listen to them anymore, because it's just like, I know what you're going to say. Like, and I don't know.
It's explored territory.
What I do like about Jordan Peterson, as compared, and I don't know how right he would consider himself, but as compared to some of the other people on the right, I think the way that you can engage with people who think differently is not quite as like confrontational. Does that make sense? Like, you look at a Ben Shapiro and you're like, oh my gosh, you're so extra sometimes. Like, like, or, you know, like, or like, oh, okay, like have you done the like change my mind Steven Crowder thing?
I've seen a few of them.
Okay, so here's my issue with that. Like, I find them somewhat interesting to sit and hear two people talk about it, but like, Steven Crowder is not in there to actually get his mind changed. He wants to sit there and shut you down. And it becomes so them against us, whereas like Jordan Peterson really genuinely engages people in more of a like, well, why do you think that? Like, and the way that he can engage people, and I don't know, it's different than a lot of the right, which is so much about winning, which is not how I necessarily think we should go about it. Like, that there's right and wrong. If there's truth, there's right and wrong, whatever. But like, we're all trying to figure it all out. Yeah. And so like, seeing it more as a journey. And that's why I think like Tim Mackey is really cool, because that's how he sort of goes about it. It's like, it's this journey of us understanding stuff, and like, the more we learn and the more we come together with people, the clearer we see the world as a whole.
And Tim Mackey's goal is to teach people about the Bible. So if you look way back on my channel, you'll see a conversation between Jordan Peterson and a friend of mine who's a youth pastor in Fresno. If Jordan Peterson had the time to do what I'm doing, which is to talk to, as people say, normals, like, you know, all of us, you would find, because actually a number of people have, you know, did what I did in terms of have a Patreon conversation with Peterson and just get him one-on-one. He's very good conversationalist. He's very interested in people. He loves to explore people's ideas. And when you can get him in that mode, he's just a delight to watch. The difficulty is in his context right now. He just keeps getting shot at. And so much of his stuff is so conflicted. And part of this is Peterson's, how he has steered it, because he gets into all the culture war stuff. And he, in my mind, isn't really a conservative. He's much more of a moderate who's increasingly, in many ways like myself, increasingly much more on the conservative side, because the left just keeps going. It's like, how far out y'all gonna go there?
Yeah,
world. So.
Yeah, I feel like I see him in that way too. Like, where I wouldn't consider him like conservative, but like, he gets lumped in with these conservatives, and like, how many people try to call him alt-right? And
it's just silly. It's just silly. Well, Cassidy, we're about out of time. I will send this to you, and you can decide if you'd like me to post it or if you'd like me to. It's up to you.
I mean, I'm sure it's fine, but okay. I'll let you know. I'm sure it's fine, though. I don't really care.
Okay. Well, it was delightful talking to you again.
Yeah, nice to talk to you. Maybe I'll talk to you again.
For me.
Okay, will do.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye.